Russell T Davies has recently given an interview to BBC Radio 2 on the Michael Ball Show, and he gave this very interesting tidbit for Series 14, Episode 4. Let's listen.
Have you started work on Doctor Who?
I have. I sat here and I watched episode 4 last night, and I think it's one of the greatest things I've ever made in my life. So I'm very, very happy with it.
Oh, my Lord. That's fantastic.
It's looking so good, Michael.
So considering that this is the writer of Doctor Who Series 2, Episode 10, Love and Monsters, we've got a very exciting episode ahead, I think. Also, of course, It's a Sin, Years and Years, etc., etc. However, that means if he's writing Episode 4, we know he's writing Episode 1, certainly writing the finale. One of the other writers that could be joining him alongside those other episodes is a brand new writer called Stephen Moffat. Yes, the Mirror decided to misspell Stephen in this article for some reason. It's spelt right here, but for the headline, where it counts, it's spelt wrong. Anyway, Stephen Moffat set for Doctor Who return as Russ T Davies asks for new episodes. The 61-year-old acted as showrunner on the BBC One series between 2010 and 2017. Having been a writer on the show, he has now been asked to create stories for the 15th Doctor, Ncuti Gatwa. Stephen Moffat is set to make a sensational return and write adventures for Ncuti, etc., etc. Before he was in charge of Doctor Who, Moffat wrote fan favourite episodes like The Empty Child, Girl in the Fireplace, Blink, etc., etc. A source said, Russell is on a mission to make Doctor Who great again. Event television not to be missed, which is what it was for many years during his and Stephen's tenure in charge of the show. One of the ways he can do that is to ensure he has the best possible people writing for the programme. He has nothing but respect for what Stephen achieved with the show and was a fan of his vision as showrunner. He approached him about returning in just a writing capacity because he knows Doctor Who inside and out and has a brilliant imagination for adventures in space and time, etc., etc. Now, this needs taking, I think, with a grain of salt. The Mirror is normally good with Doctor Who scoops. However, those Doctor Who scoops are written by journalist Nicola Medfin. This comes from Mark Jeffries. This is a different writer, so we do not entirely know what Mark's track record is. However, we do know that one writer who will not be joining Doctor Who now for the foreseeable future is Doctor Who redacted producer and basically director Ella Watts, because it leaked through a CV of Carissa Hamilton Bannis, who is a writer on Get Even and many other things. In her CV, announced that she was working on Doctor Who Redacted Series 2. Now, Redacted was a BBC Sounds audio drama, primarily written by Juno Dawson and also spearheaded by Ella Watts. It was a very fun, very gay, very female-led Doctor Who story. It was very, very good. I did a review of it a few months back, and it says here that the producer now is James Goss. James Goss is a mainstay at Big Finish, is a very terrific writer. I do not take issue with the quality of James Goss's work. However, it seems to be an issue to basically take a BBC Sounds audio corner of the Doctor Who universe that was primarily driven and led by women, and then put James Goss in charge of it. I know that there's a lot of identity politics in that statement, but it's made a little bit worse by Ella Watts' statement, who claims that despite wanting to work on Redacted Series 2, she said that she wanted to remain on the project, but BBC replaced her without explanation or an application process. Now, this is a very diplomatic and very kindly worded statement, saying that she cannot wait to listen to Redacted, acknowledges that James Goss will be a fantastic producer. If Redacted Series 2 is anything like his previous work, it'll be fantastic, and I wish him the best. She says, Doctor Who means different things to different people. As a fan and a queer woman, to be part of bringing a queer woman-fronted show to the Whoniverse was an immensely proud moment in my life. From pitching it in 2018 to bringing Juno on board in 2019, then producing, casting, script editing, writing on it and directing it, it's been incredible. I'm sorry I've not been given the opportunity to see it through. This isn't the first time in podcasting that women have been replaced by men following successful first seasons. I'm heartbroken that it happened here. And depressingly, this was announced a day after International Women's Day, and I'm curious whether or not the BBC were going to push the button on announcing it a day earlier, and then realised the optics are going to be the worst thing ever. So I'm going to call Davis, because we're going to talk about this, because it just seems like, okay, so brand new talent, a great proven success. I mean, it has to have been successful if Redacted Series 2 is being made. Series 1 had to have been good. Is getting taken away at the same time that Stephen Moffat is allegedly being brought back in. This is an optics conversation. I'd like to introduce Davis, YouTube legend, originator of Broke Canon. How are you doing, Davis?
Doing very good. Only slightly embarrassed by that intro this time.
No, it's all good. So you've seen everything unfold over the past couple of days. I know that it's not strictly speaking connected. Ella Watts no longer being in Redacted and Stephen Moffat allegedly being brought to Shooting Atwood's era. Like, that is a rumor that needs to be clarified up in front. But I know that you have a lot of thoughts about the changing of the guard and who should be seeing Doctor Who into the future, and you can explain it way better than me. That's why I brought you on.
Thank you so much. Let's just say the last 5 months they paint a picture, don't they? One that I've been on both sides of the fence of, and my thoughts on all of this, Redacted and Moffat and Rusty Davis, they're all so messy that do feel free to cut me off at any point. Anyone in the chat, do feel free to grab in, because my notes are messy. My emotions at seeing David Tennant on screen at the ending of Power the Doctor, it's all messy. So I'll try and bring whatever sense to it I can. It's not entirely positive at the minute, but no.
No, this is a therapeutic therapy session. Davis, hit me. Me and the chat are here to see you through your issues.
That's very nice, because I do consider my relationship to Mr. Davis Freudian, so then maybe that is quite apt.
I do like the background. I like the books in the background as well.
A little bit. Yeah, a bit on the nose, but that's fine. We're all a bit on the nose these days when it comes to Doctor Who. I think it's definitely concerning. I don't think anything evil, cruel, or bigoted has been done or said. I think there must be so much more to this than we see, which are just... And I know Rusty Davis isn't the reason that David Tennant's been in all the expanded media for the last 3 years. Of course, that's not him. But he does bear the responsibility of being the front man. And when stuff like the Redacted situation happens, it does put it into perspective a bit. And I'm just really glad that a lot of people got vocal about it on Twitter. People were actually paying attention to my weird little rants.
Yeah, I think it was good to see Doctor Who Twitter for once unified on something, especially with... I also think it was so balanced as well. No one was saying James Goss is terrible, let's hate James Goss. It was all, we understand that these are forces higher up, shall we say, that... and also just the way that Ella Watts allegedly wasn't even told and learnt at the same time as everybody else.
Yeah, it's been a mature response, and I think a lot of us can see ourselves in Ella's position, maybe, because this is kind of the closest we've had to a new emerging voice, or one of very, very few opportunities. One of very few bones have been thrown to upcoming fan writers in recent years. There's lots behind that. It's not entirely a Rusty Davis mentality, and we can get into that later, actually. Confused position on things. But it's sad to see one of them just absolutely be written out with actually showing a horrible lack of respect.
Yeah, one reason I wanted to chat with you specifically is because you brought something to my attention a while ago. It might have been in another video or something, where you mentioned like the Fitzroy Tavern Club, which was like something, it was a club in the 90s or early 2000s where Doctor Who writers would come together and geek out and chat and everything. You know, Paul Cornell, I think Rob Shearman was there, Rusty Davis, Stephen Moffat, and how it seems like a lot of that original team, now 30 years removed, it's still them writing for the show. And I understand maybe having one of them as the showrunner, but I think it's the idea that we should really be looking for new voices moving forward.
Absolutely, that's where I come into it. We do have to be careful with the F word. The F word in this case being Fitzroy. It's become more of a metaphor these years. There's no proof that Rusty Davis was ever there. No proof that Chibnall was there. It's mates through mates.
Yeah,
it's awfully chummy. Yeah. So as long as you understand they don't all have to be in the same pub giving each other all the same jobs.
Yeah.
To understand there might be a bit of a building problem here, and by here I mean the last 10 years. And I think right away, the immediate thing is, why are these Doctor Who fans being resentful? Or can't they just be happy about good Doctor Who? A good writer. I joked the other day, Doctor Who's the only programme in the world where its fans would take issue with their favourite actor being written by their favourite writer back in their favourite show.
Yeah.
Name another show where that's a problem, where that could ever be a problem. And I just want to, before we get into the thick of it, to clarify, I know this makes us look like resentful, even bitter fans, and I've actually been like thinking about that so much over the last week. You can call us resentful easily, but also Russell Davis, I think, comes across as resentful in most of these recent interviews. I think he seems resentful about the age of streaming, or the next generation of kid writers. I think he's resentful about the UK, and I think he's quite confused about it because everything he seems to say in interviews doesn't line up with the Russell Davis we've grown up with, who's been very, very open about how he views the industry.
Well, there was even that I just mentioned. I just remembered it now. There was that interview with Mark Gatiss and Russell T Davis in the Sunday Times in January, talking about the idea of like he hates TV writers who are just like making their way in because they are wanting to increase representation. And I think that might have been a strong like wording just to make an entertaining interview. But I think there may have been a bit of truth in it.
There's a lot to unpack there. That's the one that really like pricked my ears up. Specifically, they don't know how to write. Yeah, that could be a quote completely taken out of context. But then you also have to, you know, come to terms with the fact that he's interviewing with the right wing press. And I think we've seen a massive shift in gears as to how Russell T Davis at least is going to operate, where his priorities lie, and how he's going to make Doctor Who work again is by playing the conservative game to some degree. So the fact that he's even like talking to these papers is, I mean, in this book, Writer's Tale, he's talking to Benjamin Cook about, they're actually at it, like saying, your late partner, rest in peace, didn't want you talking to the right-wing press, because obviously the huge history of homophobia from those rags, frankly. So the fact that he's not only given them this interview, like all smiley and charming, and giving them exactly what they want as well, giving them exactly what these right-wing press would want to hear in terms of representation, in terms of like, oh, the youth aren't doing it. How can it seem like anything else other than a ladder pull?
Yeah, I also got the sense as well reading that interview, like, yeah, a lot of people's first scripts or early ones are not going to be the best. Like, I've listened to The Mind of Hodiak, Russell. I know your first scripts weren't the best thing ever, but also it's the idea that if you are going to like have these issues with early up and coming writers, then you or people at Bad Wolf, it doesn't even need to be Russell specifically, that are able to mentor them as the next generation of writers.
We're a long, long way away from the V&A age, which for anyone listening doesn't know was how all these people got their start, how the Chris Chibnalls, no, I'm not sure about Chris Chibnall, Stephen Moffat and Robert Shearmans, they all managed to submit because the show was dying and the toys were selling cheap, so they managed to get in whilst the iron was hot. And through the V&As, they've it's a V&A to revival pipeline, and it's seems to now be circling back on itself, which is where the alarm bells start to come out.
Yeah, and to clarify for the chat, it was an interview in the Times. It was called Rusty Davis and Mark Gatiss How to Save TV. It was for the Sunday Times. It wasn't for the Radio Times, just to clarify for the chat. There's a paywall behind it, but you know what to do, internet.
Him outing his own students that he's mentoring is only about the fifth weirdest thing in the piece as well.
Yeah.
Particularly strange comment from Gatiss about working the bins. And it does become about status then, doesn't it?
Yeah.
These people hold power within the industry, and I'm not entirely sure I feel comfortable with them calling these shots or telling us how the industry should be.
Yeah.
And what the problem is with this new generation, I don't know.
Well, when it comes to other approaches, for like Chris Chibnall, since leaving Doctor Who, has collaborated now with ITV to fund and create and workshop showrunner workshops for upcoming writers, like basically an ITV equivalent to the BBC Writers' Room, to try and get the new generation of talent. Because once you've got all these writers here, how do you actually get them fronting and heading TV shows? There's no formal proper pathway to it. So Chibnall is trying to do that, not trying to get showrunners to fight each other, but I think it shows that there is a way.
If we were to pursue that a little bit, Moffat's era, in terms of the scripts at least, is also about future-proofing the show. It's about putting the mechanics to bed, the Time of the Doctors and the Doctor Falls. These are opening the show up, bringing in new voices. Chris Chibnall carried the torch on from Twice Upon a Time, and then what you get in Series 11, Series 12, you get hugely diverse new pieces of Who that you couldn't have had before. So when it feels like, I mean, for me at least, I can only speak for myself here, the last 5, 7 years of Who, it feels like it's been taking a couple steps back at times. This is the one regard Doctor Who really cannot afford to take steps back on. Just, it's been nearly 20, 25 years of the same few writers, and that is pretty much in every medium as well. It's why I think sometimes I do gravitate more strongly to the books or to the comic lines. I'm currently looking at Cutaway Comics. Brian Blessed's comic book face is looking at me. He plays Omega in those.
Yeah.
And I'm currently flooded in with new takes on Doctor Who that are so wild, and I don't see it reflected on TV.
Yeah, I think a big part of that is not, it's also because of the production logistics of only having so many episodes every year and a half. In that Radio Free Skaro interview that Chibnall did at Gallifrey 1, he said that before lockdown was announced, he was having meetings with Pete Mateague and Vinay Patel, these writers who he had been working with over the past couple of years for Series 13. Before, it was him and Maxine Alderton, just those two writers for Flux and the 2022 specials. So even when, it doesn't have to be entirely new names moving forward with Russell. I've heard rumours that he's writing 6 or 7 of the next few episodes, if it's only going to be 8 or 9 episodes, including the Christmas special in the next year. So, yeah, if it was a writer like Jamie Matheson, or even someone like Neil Cross from Series 7, that would be ideal. But going back to the same pool of writers who met in the tavern in the 90s, I don't think it's a great sign.
No, the closest inspiration I would go for here would be, well, of course, Ella. But second of all, Sarah Dollard is a great example of basically a fan writer, one of us, really like breaking down the barriers between fan writer and writer, which, I don't believe in anyway, because fan writers are fan writers anyway. Russell T Davies is a fan writer. But it does feel like the old guard are kind of proving that the showrunner role doesn't quite work as is. And I know that's a huge sweeping statement to make as someone who is not involved in the production, but I've not only been thinking it for a while. It seems paternalistic. It seems maybe like, how do we even find people who want to do this job? I'm not sure Doctor Who, I think the industry of television itself has changed too much for a showrunner role. And if, there's a billion different quotes, there's no shortage of complaints of Moffat and Stephen going, it's an insane, ridiculous amount of work. No one would want to do this. There's really no one forcing them to. But in sweeps Russell T Davies, giving us back his future for the show. Not just his vision again, we've seen his vision, we're getting Vision Round 2, but also next lot of talent is going to be handpicked by him. If he is, best case scenario is that he is grooming, that's a bad word. Promise I do like the man. He's raising, he's tutoring. Yeah, new talent for the series, maybe through spin-offs. We can get into that later. That all these hypotheticals, it's a best case scenario, and I'm still not completely happy with the idea that he is choosing Doctor Who's future, because I've seen it move over 80s fans. Part of my brain wants to say. It's not the entire conversation, but if that little petty bit in there, it does. Hinchcliffe, I'm sure, Philip Hinchcliffe could still be doing horror riffs. I'm sure he still could be doing it. And we think of all the creatives and eras of Doctor Who have been cheated of since then, if he had stayed in the role.
But yeah, I'm just looking at the chat as well. Some people are saying don't care as long as the stories are well written. I think that's losing the forest through the trees.
It's short. It does. I think that's short-sighted, personally.
Yeah, but I was gonna say exactly that, because you could get some terrific stories and from experienced veteran writers for the next like 2 or 3 years. But what about when they want to move on, and now you've got nobody to take over from Russell once everything's done? One reason why fans were so okay with the change from Russell to Moffat was because you had a consistent writer over the span of 4 or 5 years to prove his worth. Like, not saying like he'd worked on stuff before, he'd worked on Coupling, and he'd been, Curse of Fatal
Oh, yeah,
Death and everything.
let's make it very clear, to his credit, Russell Davis is a writer by the time he's written Damaged Goods.
Yeah.
Like, he is an established writer. But then, even so, we've got those comments to perhaps shift gears a little bit. We've got those comments in the interview about they're just angry. The next generation, they can't write because they're angry, because they feel left out. They just want diversity. Even if we go with his train of logic about this imagined group that do not exist, Damaged Goods involves the AIDS epidemic.
Yeah, I was about to say this comes from years and years, and It's a Sin writer.
Yeah, it's a bizarre comment for these two men to make, especially Gatiss, who's very, very outspoken and very, very gay. Just part of me feels like maybe they're playing ball with the country, with the government, with the TV industry landscape. They're more willing than they were in 2005 from all of these interviews to play the game. And I do think the end goal will be get more representation, bring Who back, great stories like everyone comes to saying. Tennant is, let's say Tennant is bait, and really the real goal is to get like a trans lead in, and then that can lead to more diversity, more representation on screen, more spin-offs. That's more diversity. That's Rusty Davis's line of thinking from everything I've been watching in the last few weeks. Aging white men first. By their rules, their way. It does feel like, yes, Rusty Davis, he's saying, I will broaden out Doctor Who for the next generation, for more and more voices, because he is a champion, a lifelong industry champion of diversity and, English entertainment. But after he's done with it, does seem to be the gist. Like, once I'm done, then you can play with the toys. And just like, nah, you played with the toys enough already if we're going to stay in this playground analogy.
Yeah, it seems, I know that a lot of people in the chat go like, it's not even started yet, but we're on about like the messaging and the optics and like moving forward as well. We need to try and like, we still are going to be waiting until November before we see anything actually tangibly on screen. But if we're going with the vibes now, and also let's just say that if the rumors are true and that Russell is writing 6 to 7 of the upcoming 8 to 9 episodes, like it's going to be an entirely like Russell fronted brand new series for Ncuti Gatwa, and I'm okay with him writing the majority of the scripts, but where does that leave everybody else, especially if Stephen Moffat ends up being one of those new writers as well?
Exactly. We don't have insider knowledge. These are all just concerns, growing concerns. Let me make it clear. I need to enjoy this era. I need to be able to let myself enjoy it. Because otherwise, I don't know. I'll go spare. It's just, I think it would be so incredibly distracting. Again, anything he's saying is bad or wrong, even per se. I just find it, as I said on Twitter, ignorant and irredeemably smug.
Yeah.
And it's putting me off vaguely. And I'm a lifelong fan of his work, and as are you.
Yeah, like the reason I don't want Stephen Moffat back as a writer is not because I dislike his work. It is literally the opposite. I think he has got more credits than any other writer in TV Doctor Who ever. Like
my biggest inspirations, quite frankly. You know what inspirations do? They're meant to inspire people.
Yeah.
To carry on. And we're just going around in circles. Oh, that's sorry. Yeah. Before that, you mentioned the smaller episode count. Sorry.
Yeah. If it's going to be, let's say it's 8 episodes and Russell is writing 6 of them, Moffat writes 1, and then where does that leave? Like, are you just going to put random no-name Johnny John or something.
The guy who wrote Full Circle back in the 80s. The 14-year-old kid who wrote Full Circle when the BBC accepted submissions from children.
I'm thinking Paula Moore, Attack of the Cybermen writer, which is just two writers in a trench coat. It's just Russell and Stephen in a trench coat writing episode 7 of the next series.
Well, this is great because to me, Doctor Who is a variety show. There's been lots of interesting conversations on Twitter about, well, some people call it discourse. I thought it was just really interesting seeing what Doctor Who means to people just as a whole in one word. Lots of, hope, lots of just quality sci-fi. To me, change was the big one. Is Doctor Who about change? Vaguely, in the way that maybe any media is, any long-running franchise is. To me, Doctor Who is a variety show. Since the very beginning, it's been genre mixing and genre shifting and getting as many different writers write different testing, like breaking this idea to the breaking point and seeing how many different things we can do with it. And it's always been that for me. So even back in the Chibnall years when we had Vinay Patel, when we had Pete McTeague, all these new voices coming up, Alderton, I feel like even that wasn't enough. I never felt satisfied with, even then, how many new voices were onto the program. It still felt like Chibnall had such a overwhelming majority stake in voice. And I just can't, with an even more shrinking episode count year by year, it's just going to get worse and worse, I fear. And even when Rusty Davis does move on, when Rusty Davis 2, his predecessor, shows up, a little mini clone version of him, does show up, there'll be 5 episodes, it'll be a mini-series, and then where is the opportunities for new talent? Now, maybe this is where we go into spin-offs.
Well, one last thing as well. When it comes to diverse writers, we're not just talking about gender, sexuality, disability, etc. Although those things are absolutely important. I think, was it Tharies who said on Twitter that unless we've got a disabled writer, we haven't really fully got a diverse writing team, which I agree with. But also it's diversity in terms of experience. I want your veteran writers. I want to know what Sarah Lancashire's Doctor Who episode looks like, or something.
Yeah.
Even Neil Cross, who was Luther showrunner. I loved knowing what his Doctor Who looked like for a few episodes, and I think that's my favourite version of the 11th Doctor, especially in Hyde at least. And also you want your no names. What's the Simpsons joke? Joey Jojo Shimoyan or something. I want that guy. But yeah, it's just in terms of diversity of experience and diversity of what you've written in the past, not just have you written Doctor Who before. I think that's where you get some of your most exciting stuff, like Mallory Blackman, who wrote novels and also wrote Noughts and Crosses, ends up doing Rosa. And I think that's one of the stronger voices of Series 11, personally at least.
The weaker voices, I love him, but Frank Cottrell Boyce, an actual children's writer, that is such a different idea and fundamental different stuff for the show. I want that voice. I want to experience that voice for a bit. But it's all been very limited. And when you're writing a show under a showrunner, they basically go overwritten anyway.
Yeah.
Who was the last writer in Doctor Who who had creative freedom? Was it the writer of your favourite show, Class?
Patrick Ness. I was about to say, Doctor Who in one word, class. There we go. But yeah, I want Patrick Ness to return for an hour to basically tie up all of the loose ends of Class with shooting Atlas Doctor in 1 hour of TV.
Or not, but hypothetically, whatever you think of Class, going by the 2006 rules, when Doctor Who was at its peak, obviously, I know things have changed maybe since then, when they were really, really trying to branch out, Chibnall was given Torchwood. He was head writer of that. Produced some very questionable and lambasted scripts, Cyberwoman, A1, I wouldn't say anybody's favourite. And then instantly, almost... it got awards, actually did quite well as a show, but he personally was rewarded with a season 2. And now you've moved to BBC 2, and it feels like a reward, whereas you could say the opposite is true for Redacted and Class.
Yeah.
I just wonder where can we factor that into the conversation?
Well, I mentioned when the Stephen Moffat rumors started circulating that if he wanted to showrun a spin-off, I'd be happy with that personally. Because, I'd like to know what Steve Moffat does with characters who aren't the center of the universe. Like Doctor Who's version.
Never happened.
like,
Never happened.
Like Doctor Who's version of coupling.
Okay. Yeah.
I think that would be something he'd probably also really, really enjoy writing as well. And then you use that as well to spearhead talent from a different direction. And then, you get a really good writer on the Ace McShane Adventures series 1, and then they do a script or two.
Sounds great. Sounds great.
And then they do a script or two for the next series of Doctor Who. Then you can have like an ecosystem of writers, and maybe even bring like Timothy X Attack or someone, or Helen Goldwyn from Big Finish, and see what they have to offer as well for TV if they're so inclined.
This is the utopian idea of how it's all going to pan out. I mean, we are all projecting, of course.
Yeah.
It is so early. Everyone's assumed it's going to work like that because of his motivations as a showrunner, producer. He's more a producer these days, isn't he? But also, just even in that scenario, I'm not sure how it's going to play out. I'm not sure how good it's going to be to have Doctor Who on air every single week of the year. I have other pieces of media I'm interested in.
Lies.
And I'm trying to look around for some. I'm searching. If even in that, even if spin-offs do work that way, I'm just not entirely sure that's the future. And even then, it's a precedent set by Rusty Davis.
Well, so what's your ideal setup for spin-offs then?
My ideal spin-off.
Well, not even like your ideal spin-off, but how would you format it to work with Doctor Who?
I think Redacted was honestly the best example, and I'm not just saying that as a transition to get myself out of this question. I really just think just something emerging out of nowhere on a medium that maybe people didn't consider for Doctor Who. The Chibnall era has actually had a bunch of great examples. The Weeping Angel games, that was an ARG, the app mobile game. I'm not saying that's the perfect venue for a spin-off, but I'm saying there are so many companies willing to get their hands on Doctor Who. From comics and audios, I've just seen so many different approaches. I think anybody could just emerge and be like, I've got this little small scale idea for Doctor Who. Budget isn't important, in my opinion, for Doctor Who. Not really. It's never needed it in the past. Some of our fan favorites are The Deadly Assassins and Brain of Morbius, made out of cardboard. You can start a show with nothing and cardboard and enthusiasm, and those are some of the fan favorites. So especially Redacted, which had all such a tiny budget, I think that's got to be explored more. Low budget, near fan works, maybe even start integrating fan works, because the line is getting smaller and smaller between the two.
Yeah.
That's, I think, where spin-offs have to go. But we seem to be getting MCU, Disney streaming. That's the impression that everybody's seeming to get.
Yeah, I think unfortunately with the MCU and what Star Wars has done with the Disney Plus spin-off shows, which even they're now starting to realize they might have overstepped themselves with like 4 shows a year plus 4 more films.
It's Star Trek that Rusty Davis personally admires. He loves what Star Trek have been doing in recent years. He that's the model we think he's going to start trying to copy. Just the idea of not looking forward to this new enterprise of Doctor Who that's on our way and trying to pick holes in it before it's already there. And I got to promise that really just isn't it. I'm just I'm worried that if this is successful, which it will be, which is what matters ultimately, will it stay like this forever? Once the Bad Wolf Studios, Russell Davis, Disney Plus train gets going, will we be able to get off it?
Yeah, and also just because the economics of TV have changed so much since the first Russell T Davis era, where they could do 3 shows at a time, and I think Moffat looked at maybe doing it because he was also working on Sherlock at the same time. He wouldn't have been able to have divided his attention. And I know that
Stop overworking our best writers, please. Just as a moral going forward.
yeah. But yeah, I'm looking forward to like Redacted, and like in a curious nature. I want to know whether or not it stays in like the Jodie Whittaker era, or if it moves on to Tennant or Ncuti or whatever is going to be happening. And I don't doubt that James Goss is a very qualified writer who I'm sure will do a very, very good job. But someone in the chat mentioned earlier he's got like 260 Big Finish credits. I've got the sense that, you know, he's not lacking for the work at the moment. I'm sure that he's not there with his like little metal cup sparing for change or something. So it's a bit disappointed that something that was so, the identity of its creators was so integral to the show itself, and it's panned out the way it has, unfortunately.
It's just not a good look. Part of you has to, when everyone saw that response, I think everyone collectively said, what are they thinking? I don't want to get into the internal disputes of it. For all we know, they fell out as creatives. For all we know, just James Goss is a really trusted colleague. This is all good, but it just doesn't tie into this narrative very well. It's we're trying to root for new emerging forms of Doctor Who, and it seems like they're being shut down or replaced. And the representation angle is hugely important, like especially a podcast. Taking away a producer, like it's already such a small knit group. I'd imagine the creative team.
Yeah.
Would remove someone so, formative to it all. Just, how would you call it, redacted at that point?
Yeah, I also think something like Redacted as well is such like a niche thing. It's not like you've replaced Ella Watts with like Jed Mercurio from Line of Duty or something. It's not like you've replaced Ella with this massive industry name that has recognition value with the general public. No disrespect to James Goss, but the average person's not going to know who he is or what his contributions to Doctor Who have been. It's a niche within a niche, so I don't know why they had to go about it the way that they did.
It's a trusted hand, and that seems to be all the BBC care about. Who knows if this is ultimately a BBC decision when it comes to the new show, but in terms of Redacted, obviously. Yeah, you've got to wonder if it's shaken confidence in the brand in general. I think representation is hugely important, obviously, especially when it comes to Redacted. But I can't quite speak to some of it as a cis man myself.
Sorry, I'll be the obnoxious one for both of us.
No, I want to make that real clear. But for me, it is the generational divide I can speak to. And that's what rubs me the wrong way time after time. Redacted feels like the bare minimum. And even that's been shunted in nasty terms. That's not very charitable, is it? Not a very charitable read, but it's how I feel.
Yeah. Well, also Juno Dawson is still attached as well, so that's really cool. And I know that she was meant to do an episode of Class Series 2 before that didn't pan out. We were robbed spiritually, I think, from no Class Series 2. So it's a complicated discussion. I also I've got my own grievances with some corners of Docu Who Twitter, where I think there is a part of like misandry at play here as well. And I'm not saying that that's an illegitimate position. It's in some circumstances, but it does feel an awful lot like especially dropping the news about Ella the day after International Women's Day.
Yeah, no, I've actually come around entirely on those points. It was a certain sex of vocal Chibnall fandom that led the charge, and at that point I was totally against it. And I've really come around in the last couple of weeks to seeing their point of view, even if not everybody is thinking for the exact right reasons. Let's put it that way. You can't take away from Russell Davis's achievements in diversity, not one bit. I don't think that should be the narrative here at all. I don't think the BBC is the BBC into representation. Let's not go into that one. But I think representation. Oh man, where am I going with these points, man?
Well, main protagonist Ivy is in the chat. Says I think the problem is when people bring up genuine issues of representation, misogyny, etc., it gets written off as drama, or people automatically think we're attacking a person rather than an idea. Yeah, I definitely agree with the first bit. I think it's because there's so much like drama mongering online anyway. So when something genuinely messed up does happen, it's kind of like Boy Who Cried Wolf, but with fandom. It's when you are seeing these patterns start to emerge properly over the past couple of weeks. Not saying there was nothing before, but I think a lot of it was blown way out of proportion, especially like when Russell was talking about not regenerating into Jodie's costume at the end of Power of the Doctor. I got the arguments, but I also really understood Russell's position based on that interview he gave. But yeah, I think in recent weeks we are really starting to see where there's smoke, there's fire, if that makes sense.
I remembered my point. Thank you, Ivy. I depend on Ivy. I put my last two brain cells together. He's into representation. He's going to make big waves for it when his era comes back. It does feel like Russell and just the current hand, all of the 80s lot, who also feel like they are the gatekeepers on progressivism in British TV. That's the vibe I seem to get. And we've got the hypocrisy of him calling out diversity in TV. Like they just want diversity. They don't care about TV. They don't care about the medium. They don't care about stories. It just seems incredibly unfair when we've had such people working, like Ella herself, working on Doctor Who and giving us such bold selling points. The selling points of Redacted is the voice of it all and the characters who don't sound anything like people we've heard in the Doctor Who universe before. Seem like real people. They seem like new people, and it's just more of this, please.
Yeah, and Redacted is not just a story about a bunch of queer about a bunch of queer women. It's a bunch of queer women who are massive Doctor Who fans. Like it's literally a meta commentary on fandom.
Yeah. I can't remember the plot of Redacted per se. I can absolutely tell you a lot of things about the characters and just what they mean to each other. And then I'll be very sad to see like that a perspective taken away, if not actual quality. I think those have to be two very different things.
Yeah. I also want to stress as well to the chat who are saying this might be being blown out of proportion. It's not just a Doctor Who industry issue. It's a general industry issue. With the lack of funding happening in the media and TV industry at the moment, those gateways and pathways for new writers and new creatives are dwindling day by day. You will get things like the BBC Writers' Room, but how many of those success stories get actually followed up on? How many of those success stories get a script or a series commissioned a couple of years later? Not many.
Has anyone in the chat been through the Writers' Room process? And, actually seen how pretty merciless it is.
Yeah, and I think that's why I really appreciate what Chibnall's doing with his work with ITV. Not to say him bad, Russell, not to say Chibnall good, Russell bad, etc. But it's
that's not my interest either.
Okay, you want to try and address the balance of, say, like female camera operators in the UK TV and film industry, because they're like, for every 20 camera operators, like 19 of them are male and one of them's female in the UK. That's a rough statistic, but you won't really know if these efforts to try and get more in the industry are going to work until several years from now, once they've worked their way up from camera assistant, camera trainee, working their way up to DOP and camera operator and stuff. These things move glacially, and you're not going to know for a long time. So when we're seeing that even the beginning processes of those steps aren't really functioning at the moment, it means 5-10 years from now, where is the new talent going to come from?
We're both people who have been brought up on Doctor Who, namely, ironically, by Russell, most likely. He is like a spiritual father figure, even.
Is there like a term for Oedipus complex, but for dads?
We must usurp him and replace him. That is exactly the thing. We've both had our creative sparks from it, you and I. We both work in the creative industry currently. Not in a writing capacity, obviously. But we've been raised on all these brilliant behind-the-scenes materials, all these VAMs from Rusty Davis's era of Doctor Who. And that's, I think, what inspired, like, when he's talking about all these kids that can't write because they're all so angry of being left out of the industry, they're resentful. You think it might sound like we're pushing at straws. He's said as much himself. They are angry because they're not allowed in. But he just doesn't seem to see his place in it in these interviews, his role in it. I think there's quite a right for some people to feel quite wronged or shut out. If I can just quickly link you in the chat.
No, go for it.
Here's a Doctor Who Confidential video. A quick little, no, that is your own video. Back in
You're linking me my own stuff.
check out
Citation.
this great
Citation
stream I'm
me.
watching.
Honestly, think you believe
Winnie, shush. Sorry. Sorry, I'm just... Come on, Winnie, we're going to watch Russell together.
honestly think you believe you can become part of the Doctor's voyages that you can do with no other program?
Do you think in 20 years' time the industry will be full of people who are watching the show now as children?
Now, I'd love to think there'll be people sat here making it in 20 years.
Yeah.
Because it's there. The letters, as soon as you get the letters and the stories,
Yeah.
right? They're doing it.
Yeah. That is true.
They're writing those stories now. I get them constantly.
One imagines it will be reinvented again because that makes me really pleased, and I suspect that's not just because I'm in it now. I think that would make
Okay, that's so ironic considering that all of those gentlemen at that table are currently working on Doctor Who right now.
That's what radicalized me.
He's only 5 years out. We'll see how it goes, but that it is Russell, David, and Phil at that table. That's yeah. You're
I
right.
think they believe what they say. I really do think they do. I think Doctor Who might be in emergency mode, of course. These comments coming at him that he seems to be. If you line that interview up with his words in the Times, where he seems to be just taunting people, which I'm sure wasn't his intention. It just makes me wonder, Russell, if we think that kids trying to break into TV hate TV, why should that make them incapable of reinventing it? You know, I'm still interested in what people have to say, and maybe for all we know, we're following Russell Davis's sort of train of logic on it, where we do believe that they don't have anything to say because he doesn't think they have anything to say.
Yeah. I also, it's frustrating that going back to that interview that he did with Mark Gatiss in the Sunday Times, when I think wanting to be angry at something or have something to say in your work is like a great first step into being not just being an advocate, but also just being a creative in the industry as well. Like when people say, "Oh, I want politics out of media," it's like, so you want media that has nothing to say. You want a writer with no perspective or no goals or anything that they want to change about the world. That's boring as shit. And
it's also not what Russ Davis believes either, because we know his body of work. His comments, I do insist anyone who does maybe take issue with what we're saying, please do read the Times article in its entirety. It's a very convoluted bit of writing. It's a weird piece. I've seen a lot of people project onto it of like, well, no, he's right. He's telling the truth. But then each person seemed to be giving completely different reads of what he said. His comments are quite read as insulting. They read as generic because he seems to be very confused about television himself. And should it be political? No, I don't want it to be political. He said outright in interviews that it shouldn't be political. Therefore, I'm keeping politics out of this. It's like, you're Russell T Davis.
Yeah, that's also a bit like Terrence Dicks, though, where he's like, I don't write political Doctor Who. And it's like, sure you don't. Wink, wink, Terrence. But for, Evil Dalek in the chat, I agree with Russell that writers need to know how to write for TV first before trying to write representation. There are shows which try to write representation but aren't very good and only do damage to reputation. Shows such as Velma and Santa Inc. are extremely hated for right and wrong reasons. I'll say, I get the sentiment of they're angry and they don't know form and structure of writing. I get that, but like I said, you need to learn that. You need to be you're not born a writer immediately. You have to hone the craft, and you need people to teach you to do that. And also that Velma example is a really good counter example because Velma is a product of absolute nepotism. The people involved in it are people who don't really care about the Scooby-Doo license and just wanted to make whatever
bastards.
Yeah, just angry stuff about cancel culture or Me Too or whatever that they wanted to vent about. I think that's actually
content for the sake of content.
I think that's a good counter example from what you were trying to say, Evil Darling. That's veteran writers venting and not being very good.
I completely understand that point of view, though. It's not wrong, but the people he's mentoring are juniors who haven't learned the craft yet, and I think he's projecting or combining a bunch of different criticisms he has with the industry into one, and I think he's putting it on the wrong people, and that's a main influence going into RTD2.
Yeah, and I know we also just want to preface this by saying that we don't think that Russell is a bad person or a bad writer and stuff like that. But I think that there does need to be active movements, as like he's an industry leader, whether he likes it or not, and I'm sure he knows his influence and his status. I think that
He's going to result in a net good for the TV. It's just so many things he's saying lately are the exact polar opposite of what he would have said in 2006. And therein lies the problem. I know it's been a busy couple years for all of us. We've all gone through quite a lot of change. Not to psychoanalyze, there's obvious shifts of the man himself as well that we don't need to get into. But you hear him describe showrunner now, and it sounds more like a producer role than a writer-brained role. It's curious at the very least.
yeah,
And that's where I take issue, where he contradicts himself from the past.
yeah, especially if it is true that he's going to be writing the vast majority of the next few episodes. So he is basically just the head writer, producer, and maybe one or two guest writers come in that maybe he also touches up their work as well and does the final pass and everything. It is early days, and we are completely understanding of that. But
It was always my problem with the mini-series approach that fewer voices would get in, and it's going to be my approach with the streaming. I don't see how that. Of course, that exacerbates the problem. I don't see how that's the solution with these things.
yeah, I think I'm just looking at the latest big mini series that's had big cross-cultural appeal is the Wednesday series for Netflix, and that's got 4 writers across 8 episodes, and it's only 4 writers because one of them's a writing pair, Alfred Goff and Miles Miller, who wrote the vast majority of the episodes. So that seems to be the main, that could be the main thing moving forward for TV miniseries, where it's 3 groups of writers and they do 8 to 10 episodes, and then that's that. Ravenwood's in the chat, Andor had 4 writers for 12 episodes.
Yeah. Some streaming does have a writer's room. I think it's the showrunner idea has gone away a little bit in terms of streaming. I don't know how accurate that comment is. Where it does seem to be 4 or 5 writers handling a streaming show. That's definitely the case in the Marvel lot, which does seem to be the most apt comparison. Star Trek is the most apt comparison, actually. I just, especially with more money coming in, it's, objectively, that's got to be a good thing, right? And just it being a bigger scale production and it matching the demands of Bond television makes it more blockbuster-like. Are Disney going to be the ones who lead us to more independent voices or smaller creatives getting a voice? I'm not convinced.
But yeah, I've said all that I wanted to say really about it. Apart from I just want Stephen Moffat to showrun a Class Series 2 now. That's my life goal.
I just can't believe we're in a landscape where I'm not super jumping up and down happy for a Moffat script. What's wrong with me? Am I broken?
No, but I think I mentioned earlier, he's got more writing credits for the show than any other writer. He's his first TV credit wasn't even for the Rusty Davis era; it was Curse of Fatal Death. I think he's also he's a very particular writer when it comes to his writing style. And someone in the chat earlier mentioned that they could predict most of his dialogue before the episode even came out. And I think when you write so much, that makes sense.
That's and exactly. He's a voice that we love, but you can flanderize a voice if it sticks around long enough. You will get used to it and you'll be able to read it. We joke at work about all the comment section of our clients. We joke about fans thinking they're co-producers of the series they like, and it's quite funny, and it's very true. On Twitter, it feels like we have to state whether we're commenting on something as just a normal fan or a brand ambassador. Are we talking generally for the wider Who sphere? And I think it's all very silly. So I catch myself doing this sometimes. But I think this is trickily straddling both. I think it is just I'm worried about the future of the show as a brand. I'm worried about the show as a fan. I want new stuff genuinely. It's not just like the show ought to be doing this. No, I want the show to be doing new stuff. I want to be surprised by it. I'm sure Rusty Davis can surprise us in his own way, but ultimately, Redacted is a brilliant glimpse into how fresh Doctor Who actually can be.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Redacted felt like use the word fresh. Yeah, it was a breath of fresh air. It was so many writers as well. Like Juno Dawson has written for Big Finish before, but I think that she did a great job. Basically being like a co-head writer for Redacted, and it's a shame that Ella won't be part of series 2. Hopefully Big Finish maybe snatches her up, or maybe Russell does. Who knows? Maybe Russell has infiltrated Twitter and saw the unity around her. But whatever she does next, I'll be there to listen to it.
Again, it's quite chummy, and I'm not deep enough. I'm definitely not a writer by any means. We've both written Doctor Who, which I think does have to be said. We've both made fan works. I don't think we have any intentions of doing any more, but it does feel pertinent, doesn't it? I just want to make it clear that it's not. It doesn't come from a place of bitterness. It comes from it's a fanish desire. We've been sold on this V&A, it's a revival pipeline. Maybe you get on the real show, fans to creators, and it's been pushed by Rusty Davis and Collinson and Tennant but just when the industry has changed so much, and even like the man who the figurehead who set all this into motion has seemed to change gears on it, and sort of go back on some of his beliefs. I do have to start wondering, are we right to feel a little bit heated? That might be the word. Is that I'm not sure, is that entitled? I think a bit of fan entitlement is justified, because there's so many friends of mine, so many young writers, like Rusty Davis says, they're writing stories, or writing all these stories, and we send them. I read them. I view fan work as equal to the stuff on TV. I think your one is fantastic. I think Rory from Rassilon Productions is phenomenal. I always want to see what he's going to write next. And I just feel like they are being let down a little bit. If they had been this fictional idea of a tavern, of a pub back in the 90s, if they had sent in something at the right time, they would have been out. They could be playing with the toys right now.
Yeah.
And even people like Patrick Ness, the same applies to them. That we could be on season 5 of Class by now if we were still going by the Torchwood rules.
This is the darkest timeline. We've somehow landed in it. But
not sure about that. But if Torchwood can come back from a troubled first season and turn into one of my favorite pieces of fiction, why not Class?
Yeah. Well, I also one last point actually. I did a bit of checking before. I tweeted this out before the other day, and one era of Doctor Who that was almost exclusively made up of brand new writers was the Seventh Doctor's era. Like Remembrance of the Daleks was Ben Aronovich's very first TV script. You've got Ian Briggs, Stephen Wyatt, Kevin Clark, Mark Platt, Rona Munro doing their first ever Doctor Who scripts between seasons 24 and 26, and those ones are like fresh. They are in cases of like Happiness Patrol, they are angry scripts, and also incredibly mature ones like Survival and Ghostlight. And these are from brand new writers who had never written Doctor Who before. Whereas during the Davison and Colin Baker era, it was a bit similar to the Insiders Club, I think. So obviously it's not the best argument because the show was cancelled after that run, but
it's another one. Sure, again, and maybe that's a good example of contextual factors here rather than personal mantras. Russell Davis doesn't want this; it's just how things are.
Yeah,
it's quite possible. It's just like it was back in the late 80s.
Yeah, basically, I want Andrew Cartmel working at Bad Wolf. There we go. That we found the formula.
Well, the next Andrew Cartmel, he's on Facebook. He will mess. He will what? No, please do not mess.
Because I'm friends with him on Facebook. He's that type of guy who just responds to every friend request.
Approachable and accessible, which is not the words I would call writing for the BBC.
Yeah.
I do sound better, don't I? I really didn't try for writing that much, but even so, I do feel like Doctor Who is one of our cultural stories. In his own words, he says it's, and Moffat says all the time, it's Sherlock, it's James Bond, it's Merlin. Doctor Who is one of those now,
Yeah.
and it's probably someone else's turn.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Doctor Who's not in the public domain, but because it is so malleable, there's so much evolution inherent in its structure and its design. It does kind of belong. It should kind of belong to everybody. It should, or it's when it comes to fan works, it's almost in the public domain, more or less, because there's so much fan work out there. But
You don't want to hear my 2 cents on that.
No,
No, sir, that's another stream.
but because it's so malleable, I think it should kind of almost belong to anybody in a spiritual sense, not literally. I don't think Winifred on my desk right now should be the next showrunner, but yeah, I hope you get what I mean.
I'm just looking over to my 30,000 word dissertation on this very subject.
I still need to read your. I think you sent me it, did you? But I think I need to read it. It's something I'd be very interested to have read.
It's getting on a bit, and I don't want to apply it to this situation because it might make me sad. And I don't want to be sad.
That's fair. Okay, now the chat does want Winifred for showrunner. Okay, but it'll be very angry. It'll be a very angry series, but so we'll see how it goes. But Davis, we can't read your dissertation, but we can watch your videos and follow you on Twitter. Where can we find all of your stuff?
I'm on the channel Davis and Block Caps. If that's not enough, Broke Canon. That usually seems to do it. I don't know what these words mean, but it brings people to my content. I swear I come across much less whiny in those. But no, I want to bring frank honesty to this. I understand how it comes across to anybody who isn't completely won over or convinced or just really excited to see Rusty Davis back. But I think this perspective should be. I think we should watch out for it. Because I'm not writing off this era, not even slightly. If the writers list does come in and it's filled with great writers, or even if it's filled with no new writers, I'm going to enjoy it anyway because the scripts will be good. It'll be an interesting mixing of principles. Does that matter? Should I just watch the sci-fi show on the TV? Yeah, probably. But we like to overthink things as Doctor Who fans.
Davis, it has been a pleasure chatting with you, and thank you for adding an extra dimension to the conversation. Because I knew that you had a lot to say about the topic and could probably word it much better than me. But
apparently not. If I can leave off with one quote from my friends over at the Who Cares podcast, they've done the seminal video on this topic. They are the go-to intellectuals on this. Should have got them on, really. They don't know how to write. Generations and preparations from the Who Cares podcast.
No.
Way they got onto Doctor Who was through the hard work of being friends with one of the showrunners. Thank you. I've been Sam. Good night.
Davis, thank you so much. You have a great night.
Always enjoy. Always enjoy.
Take care. He's always wonderful to talk to. There we go. Thank you, chat, for contributing to the conversation. And Winnie, is it cat time?